How would you react if you sacrificed a part of yourself to save someone's life, only to find out your own brother discarded both your gift and the girl, moving on in secret? When I became a donor for my brother's girlfriend, I thought I was helping them build a future together. Months later, his betrayal set the stage for my quiet, precise reckoning, one that would turn the tables for good. My name is Nathan Connolly, and at 31, I've built what most people would call a stable, predictable life. I work as an IT specialist at a mid-sized tech company, live in a modest but comfortable apartment, and have never been the type to chase drama or excitement. That's always been my younger brother Lennon's department. Lennon Connolly, 28 years old and blessed with the kind of natural charisma that makes people gravitate toward him, has been getting into trouble since he could walk. And for just as long, I've been the one pulling him out of it. Whether it was covering for him when he skipped school, lending him money when his latest business venture failed, or smoothing things over with our parents when his reckless decisions caught up with him, I was always there. The dependable older brother, the safety net. I never minded it, really. Family is family, and Lennon had always been charming enough to make his gratitude feel genuine. At least, that's what I told myself. The donor situation started 8 months ago. Lennon had been dating Kendra Hayes for about 2 years at that point. A sweet, intelligent 26-year-old who worked as a nurse and somehow managed to see past Lennon's flaws to the better person she believed he could become. I liked Kendra. She was kind, thoughtful, and treated me with more respect than most of Lennon's previous girlfriends had bothered to show. When Kendra was diagnosed with kidney failure, everything changed overnight. The doctors explained that she would need a transplant to survive, and the waiting list for a donor organ was impossibly long. Her condition was deteriorating rapidly, and time was running out. I'll never forget the evening Lennon showed up at my apartment, tears in his eyes, begging me to get tested as a potential donor. He'd already been ruled out due to a genetic incompatibility, and Kendra's family members weren't viable matches either. Her friends had been tested, but none of them were compatible. "Nathan, please," he'd said, gripping my shoulders with desperate hands. "You're literally her last hope. I can't lose her, man. I can't." The decision wasn't easy. Living organ donation is serious surgery with real risks, and the recovery period would mean weeks away from work. But when I looked at my brother's face, saw the genuine terror at the thought of losing the woman he claimed to love, I knew I couldn't say no. The testing process took several weeks. Lab tests, psychological evaluations, and extensive medical examinations. When the results came back showing I was a perfect match, Lennon actually cried with relief. Kendra hugged me so tightly I thought she might crack my ribs, whispering "thank you" over and over into my shoulder. The surgery itself was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in March. I remember lying on the hospital bed, watching the anesthesiologist prepare the IV, while Lennon paced nervously in the corner of the pre-op room. The last thing I saw before going under was Kendra's face, pale but determined, mouthing "thank you" one more time. Recovery was brutal. The first few days were a haze of pain medication and uncomfortable hospital beds. Lennon visited once, staying for maybe 20 minutes before claiming he had to get back to work. Kendra, despite being in worse condition than I was, somehow managed to have flowers sent to my room every day. When we were both discharged, I spent the next 3 weeks recuperating at home, working remotely when I could manage it. Lennon called a few times to check in, but his visits became increasingly infrequent. He was busy taking care of Kendra, he explained, making sure she followed her recovery protocol. I understood, or at least I tried to. By summer, both Kendra and I had made full recoveries. The transplant had been a complete success, and her doctors were amazed at how well her body had accepted the new kidney. She sent me regular updates, photos from her follow-up appointments showing improved test results, little notes expressing her ongoing gratitude. Lennon's communication, meanwhile, had dwindled to the occasional text message. It was a Thursday afternoon in late July when I decided to stop by Lennon's gym. He'd been a member there for years, and I knew he usually worked out around 5 o'clock. I'd been feeling disconnected from him lately, and I thought maybe we could grab dinner afterward, catch up properly. The gym was crowded with the usual after-work crowd, but I spotted Lennon easily enough. He was at the bench press, surrounded by his usual crew of workout buddies, guys who treated every conversation like a competition to see who could sound the most impressive. I approached the group just as Lennon was finishing his set. He sat up, grabbing his water bottle, and launched into what was clearly the middle of an ongoing conversation. "I'm telling you, being single again is incredible," he was saying, his voice carrying that familiar Lennon confidence. "No more having to check in every 5 minutes, no more guilt trips about spending time with you guys. I'm finally free to live my life." The other guys laughed, making the kind of crude comments that always seemed to follow Lennon's relationship updates. I stood there for a moment, confused, waiting for the punchline or the clarification that would make his words make sense. "Lennon?" I called out. He turned, and for just a split second, I saw something flicker across his face. Surprise, maybe, or guilt. But it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "Nathan, hey man, what are you doing here?" "I thought maybe we could grab dinner," I said, still trying to process what I just heard. "Catch up a little." "Oh, I can't tonight. I've got plans." He stood up, grabbing his towel. "Rain check?" "Sure, but Lennon, what were you just saying about being single? What about Kendra?" The question seemed to hang in the air for a moment too long. Lennon's friends exchanged glances, and I realized they all knew something I didn't. "Look, Nathan, that's complicated, okay? We can talk about it later." Lennon's tone had shifted, becoming defensive. "I really can't get into it right now." "But she's doing well, right? The kidney is—" "She's fine," Lennon cut me off. "Everything's fine. You worry too much, man. You always have." One of his friends, a guy named Trevor, whom I'd met a few times, snorted. "Dude, you should probably tell your brother about Calla." Lennon shot Trevor a look that could have melted steel. "Shut up, Trevor." "Calla?" I asked. "It's nothing," Lennon said quickly. "Trevor's just being careless." But Trevor was already grinning, clearly enjoying Lennon's discomfort. "Nothing? Bro, you've been talking about her for weeks. When are we going to meet this mysterious new girlfriend?" The words hit me like a physical blow. New girlfriend. I stared at Lennon, waiting for him to deny it, to explain, to say something that would make this make sense. Instead, he just looked annoyed. "Nathan, seriously, this isn't the time or place for this conversation. Can we talk later?" "You have a new girlfriend?" I asked, my voice sounding strange even to my own ears. "It's complicated." "What about Kendra? What about her?" Lennon's tone was getting sharper now, more defensive. "Look, Nathan, I appreciate everything you did, okay? But that doesn't mean you get to run my life. Kendra and we grew apart. These things happen." The casual dismissal in his voice, the way he said, "everything you did," like I'd helped him move furniture instead of giving up part of my body to save his girlfriend's life, made something cold settle in my stomach. "You grew apart," I repeated. "Yeah, it happens. People change, relationships end. It's not the end of the world." Trevor and the other guys were watching this exchange like it was entertainment. I could see them trying not to smirk, enjoying the drama. "When?" I asked. "When what?" "When did you grow apart? When did you start seeing Calla?" Lennon's jaw tightened. "Nathan, you're being way too intense right now. This is exactly why I didn't want to get into this here." "I'm being intense? Lennon, I gave you my kidney for her." "You gave her your kidney," Lennon corrected. "And she's fine now. Mission accomplished, right? Everyone's happy." The way he said it, like the whole thing had been some minor favor, like the weeks of recovery and the permanent scar on my abdomen were just inconvenient details, made my hands clench into fists. "Right," I said quietly. "Mission accomplished." Lennon must have heard something in my tone because his expression softened slightly. "Look, Nathan, I know you're upset, but you're making this way more dramatic than it needs to be. Kendra's healthy, you're healthy, everyone's fine. The fact that she and I didn't work out doesn't change any of that." "And when exactly did you figure out that you didn't work out?" Lennon shrugged. "I don't know, man. A few weeks ago, maybe a month. These things don't happen overnight." A month. I'd been texting with Kendra regularly for the past month, and she'd never mentioned any problems. In fact, her messages had seemed increasingly sad, mentioning that Lennon was always busy, always had somewhere else to be. Now I knew why. "You should probably head out, Nathan," Lennon said, his voice taking on that dismissive tone I was starting to recognize. "I've got to finish my workout, and like I said, I've got plans tonight." Plans with Calla, presumably. I looked around at Lennon's friends, saw the barely concealed amusement on their faces, the way they were watching me like I was some kind of pathetic older brother who couldn't take a hint. "Sure," I said. "I'll head out." I turned and walked away, feeling their eyes on my back, hearing the murmur of conversation resume behind me. I made it to my car before the full weight of what had just happened hit me. Lennon had moved on, while Kendra was still recovering from surgery, still dealing with the physical and emotional aftermath of a life-threatening ordeal, still sending me grateful messages about how the transplant had saved her life. Lennon had already been seeing someone new, and he'd been hiding it from me. My phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment, I hoped it might be Lennon, maybe apologizing, maybe explaining, but it was from Kendra. "Hi, Nathan. Just wanted to send you my latest test results. Doctor says everything looks perfect. I can never thank you enough for giving me my life back. Hope you're doing well. I stared at the message for a long time, sitting in my car in the gym parking lot before finally driving home. That night, I found myself thinking about the car. It seemed like such a small thing compared to everything else, but for some reason, I couldn't get it out of my head. I'd bought the car for Lennon 6 months before Kendra's diagnosis. His old Honda had finally given up after years of neglect. Missed oil changes, ignored warning lights, the kind of maintenance issues that Lennon always assumed would somehow resolve themselves. He'd called me on a Saturday morning, stranded at a gas station 20 miles outside the city. His car had completely broken down, fumes billowing from under the hood, and he needed a ride. More than that, he needed a solution. I can't afford a car payment right now, he'd explained during the drive back to his apartment. Things are tight, and I need something reliable. Kendra's been talking about moving in together, and I can't exactly ask her to date a guy who doesn't have transportation. So I'd spent the following weekend at used car lots, looking for something dependable but affordable. I'd found a 2018 Honda Civic with low mileage and a clean history, negotiated a fair price, and handled all the paperwork. The title was in my name, Lennon's credit wasn't good enough to qualify for financing, and I'd paid cash anyway. The plan was for Lennon to make monthly payments to me until the car was paid off, at which point I'd transfer the title. It seemed simple enough, and Lennon had been grateful, promising to take better care of this one. For the first few months, he'd been reliable about the payments, but as Kendra's health crisis developed, the payments became irregular, then stopped altogether. When I'd mentioned it, Lennon had looked genuinely stricken. Nathan, I'm sorry. I know I owe you, but everything's been going to Kendra's medical expenses. The insurance doesn't cover everything, and she's been too sick to work. I promise I'll catch up once this is all over. I'd waved it off. Family emergency, I'd said. We'd figure it out later. Later had apparently arrived. Sitting in my apartment that evening, I pulled out my laptop and started going through my records. The car payments Lennon owed me totaled just over $8,000. The insurance was still in my name, too. I'd been paying the monthly premiums since Lennon had let his policy lapse. I found myself scrolling through old text messages, looking for patterns I'd been too trusting to notice before. Lennon asking for loans that were never repaid. Lennon canceling plans at the last minute. Lennon always having somewhere more important to be. The messages from the past few months were particularly telling. While I'd been checking in regularly, asking about his recovery and Kendra's progress, his responses had been increasingly brief and distant. "How's Kendra doing?" I'd texted in June. "She's fine, getting stronger every day," he'd replied. "Tell her I said hi. Maybe we could all have dinner soon?" "Yeah, maybe. She's still pretty tired most of the time." Now I wondered if Kendra had been tired, or if Lennon simply hadn't wanted us spending time together. Had he been worried she might mention that they were having problems, or that he'd been seeing someone else? My phone rang, interrupting my brooding. It was my mother, Judith Connolly. "Nathan, honey, how are you feeling? You've seemed a little quiet lately." My mother had always been perceptive, especially when it came to her son's moods. At 59, she maintained the kind of nurturing energy that made everyone feel welcome in her home, but she also had a talent for sensing when something was wrong. "I'm fine, Mom. Just tired from work." "Well, you work too hard. You always have." There was a pause. Lennon stopped by earlier today. He seemed excited about something. Said he's been seeing a new girl. My stomach clenched. Did he mention Kendra? "Oh, that's over, apparently. He said they decided they were better as friends." "It's probably for the best, honey. That whole situation was so stressful for everyone." Better as friends. I wondered if Kendra knew that's how Lennon was describing their breakup. "When did this happen?" I asked. "I'm not sure exactly. You know Lennon. He doesn't always share details. But he seems happy, and that's what matters, right?" "Right." "You should come to dinner this Sunday. Your father wants to talk to both of you boys about some family business. Nothing serious, just some paperwork stuff." Family business usually meant updates to their will or estate planning. My parents, Walter and Judith, had built a comfortable life through decades of careful saving and smart investments. Walter, now 62, had recently retired from his job as an electrical contractor, and they'd been talking about making sure their affairs were in order. "I'll be there," I said. "Good. And Nathan? Bring Kendra if you want. I know you two became close during the whole medical situation. She's always welcome." After hanging up, I sat staring at my phone for a long time. My mother's casual mention of Lennon's new girlfriend, the way she'd accepted his version of events without question, made something twist in my chest. This was the pattern, I realized. Lennon would create a mess, I would help clean it up, and then Lennon would move on to the next thing while I dealt with the aftermath. The difference this time was that the aftermath involved a woman who'd come dangerously close to losing her life, who was still dealing with the physical and emotional consequences of her illness, and who deserved better than being discarded the moment she was no longer Lennon's problem. I thought about Kendra's text message, her gratitude and affection, the way she'd been checking in with me regularly while Lennon had been pulling away. I thought about the conversations we'd had during our recovery period, the way she'd talked about her future with Lennon, the plans they had made. Had she known, when she sent that message about her test results, that Lennon was already seeing someone else? Or was she still believing in a future that Lennon had already decided didn't exist? My laptop chimed with a new email. It was from my bank, a routine notification about my account activity. As I scanned through it, one line caught my attention. An overdue notice for Lennon's car insurance. I'd set up automatic payments for the insurance when Lennon had first started driving the car, figuring it would be easier than trying to coordinate payments every month. But apparently, Lennon was supposed to have taken over the payments months ago, and he'd never set up the transfer. The insurance was 3 months overdue, and the policy was about to be canceled. I stared at the notice for a long time, thinking about Lennon at the gym, talking about being finally free while driving around in a car I'd bought, insured, and maintained. Thinking about him hiding his new relationship while I'd been worried about his emotional state. Thinking about Kendra, alone in her apartment, probably wondering why the man she'd planned to build a life with had suddenly become a stranger. For the first time in my adult life, I found myself genuinely angry at my brother. I opened a new browser tab and started researching my legal rights regarding the car. The title was in my name, the insurance was in my name, and Lennon had defaulted on his payment agreement. Legally, the car was mine. I could take it back whenever I wanted. The thought was surprisingly satisfying. The next few days passed in a strange haze of normalcy. I went to work, attended meetings, fixed server issues, and pretended that everything was fine. But underneath the routine, I found myself thinking constantly about Lennon and Kendra, trying to piece together a timeline that made sense. On Friday evening, I made a decision that felt both impulsive and inevitable. I was going to visit Kendra. I'd been to her apartment once before, during the early days of her recovery when Lennon had asked me to drop off some groceries. It was a small but tidy place in a decent neighborhood, the kind of home that reflected its owner's practical nature and limited budget. When Kendra opened the door, her face lit up with genuine pleasure. "Nathan, what a wonderful surprise. Come in, come in." She looked good, healthier than I'd seen her since before the surgery. Her color was back, and she'd put on some of the weight she'd lost during her illness. But there was something in her eyes, a sadness that she was trying hard to hide. "I hope I'm not intruding," I said, stepping into her living room. "I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd check in." "Are you kidding? I'm always happy to see you. Can I get you something to drink? Coffee? Water?" "Coffee would be great." While she busied herself in the kitchen, I looked around the apartment. There were still photos of her and Lennon on the shelves, but they looked somehow abandoned, like decorations from a previous tenant that no one had bothered to remove. "How have you been?" she called from the kitchen. "I feel like we haven't talked properly in weeks." "I've been fine, busy with work. How about you? How are you feeling?" "Physically? Amazing. Better than I have in years, honestly. It's incredible what a difference the transplant made." She returned with 2 mugs of coffee, settling onto the couch beside me. "I still can't believe you did that for me, Nathan. I mean, I know I've said it a million times, but—" "You don't need to keep thanking me," I said gently. "Yes, I do. What you did, it wasn't just about saving my life. It was about giving me a future. And I'll never forget that." The sincerity in her voice made my chest tighten. This was what Lennon had thrown away. This gratitude, this warmth, this genuine appreciation for the sacrifices people made. "How are things with Lennon?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. Kendra's face fell slightly. She looked down at her coffee mug, swirling the liquid around. "Things have been difficult," she said quietly. "I don't know if it's the stress from everything we went through, or if he's dealing with some kind of trauma from almost losing me, but he's been so distant lately." "Distant how?" "He barely comes over anymore. When he does, he seems distracted, like he'd rather be somewhere else. We used to talk for hours, you know? About everything and nothing. Now it's like pulling teeth to get him to have a real conversation." I felt a surge of anger on her behalf. "Have you talked to him about it?" "I've tried, but every time I bring it up, he says I'm being too needy, that I need to give him space to process everything." She looked up at me with confused, hurt eyes. "But Nathan, I'm the one who came frighteningly close to losing my life. I'm the one who went through surgery, who had to rebuild my entire life. If anyone should need space to process, shouldn't it be me?" The pain in her voice was unmistakable. Here was a woman who'd nearly lost everything, who'd been given a second chance at life, and instead of celebrating that gift with her, Lennon was making her feel like a burden. "You're not being too needy," I said firmly. "You have every right to expect support from your partner, especially after what you've been through." "Do I? Sometimes I wonder if I'm expecting too much. Maybe the whole experience changed me in ways that make me harder to love." "Kendra, no, don't think that. You're not harder to love. If anything, you're—" I stopped myself. Realizing I was about to cross a line I wasn't sure I was ready to cross. "I'm what?" I looked at her sitting there, vulnerable and beautiful, and completely unaware of her own worth, and felt something shift inside my chest. "You're incredible," I said quietly. "You're strong and kind and grateful for things that most people take for granted. Any man would be lucky to have you in his life." A flush crept up her neck. "Nathan, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." "You didn't. It's just, hearing that from you means a lot. You've seen me at my worst, and you still think—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "Lennon used to say things like that, but lately it feels like he can barely stand to look at me." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of Kendra's phone buzzing. She glanced at it, and her expression immediately became guarded. "It's Lennon," she said. "He's asking if he can come over later to talk about some things." Something cold settled in my stomach. "What kind of things?" "I don't know, but when Lennon wants to talk about things, it's usually not good news." I had a terrible suspicion I knew what Lennon wanted to talk about, and I had an even worse suspicion that Kendra wasn't going to handle it well. "Do you want me to stay?" I asked. "For moral support?" She looked at me gratefully. "Would you? I know that might be weird, but I could really use a friend right now." "Of course." But Lennon's response to her text was swift. "Actually, never mind. Something came up. We'll talk soon." Kendra stared at her phone for a long moment, then set it aside with a bitter laugh. "Something came up," she repeated. "Story of my life lately." I stayed for another hour, and we talked about everything except Lennon. Kendra told me about her plans to go back to work, about the books she'd been reading during her recovery, about her hopes for the future. She was funny and intelligent and remarkably resilient, and I found myself wondering how Lennon could possibly prefer anyone else's company to hers. When I finally left, Kendra hugged me at the door. "Thank you for coming by," she said. "I really needed this." "Anytime. I mean that." "I know you do. That's what makes you different." Different from Lennon, she meant. The comparison hung in the air between us, unspoken but unmistakable. I was halfway home when I realized I'd left my jacket at Kendra's apartment. It wasn't expensive, and I could have easily retrieved it another time, but something made me want to swing by Lennon's place first. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was the growing suspicion that I needed to see for myself what was really going on. Lennon's apartment was in a newer complex across town, the kind of place that attracted young professionals who wanted to live somewhere impressive without breaking the bank. I had a spare key. Lennon had given it to me months ago for emergencies, and I'd used it a few times to drop off packages or check on things when he was out of town. I knocked first, just to be safe, but there was no answer. The parking lot showed no sign of Lennon's car, the car I'd bought him, so I assumed he was out. I let myself in, planning to grab the jacket I'd lent him weeks ago and leave a note explaining why I'd been there. But as soon as I stepped into the living room, I knew something was different. There were women's belongings scattered around the apartment, a purse on the kitchen counter, high heels by the door, a makeup compact on the coffee table. These weren't Kendra's things. I'd been around her enough to know her style, and this was completely different. I stood there for a moment, staring at the evidence of Lennon's deception, feeling a mixture of vindication and disgust. So it was true. He really had moved on, and he was bringing his new girlfriend to the apartment while still stringing Kendra along. As I was looking for my jacket, I heard the sound of Lennon's voice coming from the bedroom. He was on the phone, and his tone was casual, relaxed in a way I hadn't heard in months. "No, babe, I told you, I'm free all weekend," he was saying. "We can do whatever you want. Maybe drive up to the lake?" There was a pause, and then Lennon laughed. "Yeah, I know. It's been complicated, but I'm handling it. She'll figure it out soon enough." "She'll figure it out." He was talking about Kendra like she was a problem to be managed rather than a person he'd claimed to love. "Trust me, Calla, by next week this whole thing will be behind us. Then we can stop sneaking around and do this properly." Calla. So that was the new girlfriend's name. I found my jacket hanging in Lennon's closet and grabbed it. But as I was leaving, Lennon's voice carried again from the bedroom. I know. I should have done it weeks ago. But she's been so fragile since the surgery, and with everything my brother did. I didn't want to come across like a complete fool. Everything my brother did, like my sacrifice, was just another complication in Lennon's life. But you're right, Lennon continued. I can't keep putting this off. She deserves to know the truth, even if it's going to hurt. I left the apartment feeling like I'd swallowed something poisonous. Lennon was planning to break up with Kendra, probably that very weekend, and he was framing it as some kind of mercy. Meanwhile, he'd been living a double life for weeks, maybe months, letting me worry about his emotional state while he played house with someone new. On the drive home, I made a decision. I pulled over at a gas station and retrieved the spare key to Lennon's car from my keychain. It was a small thing, but it felt significant. The first step in reclaiming what was mine. When I got home, I opened my laptop and checked my bank account. The automatic insurance payments for Lennon's car had been declined 3 times now, and the policy was officially canceled. Lennon was driving around uninsured, in a car that legally belonged to me, while lying to everyone about his relationship status. I thought about Kendra, sitting in her apartment, wondering why the man she loved had become a stranger. I thought about my parents, accepting Lennon's version of events without question, because they'd never had reason to doubt him before. And I thought about Lennon himself, so confident in his charm and his ability to manipulate the people around him that he'd never considered the possibility that his actions might have consequences. For the first time since this whole situation began, I smiled. Monday morning, I called in a personal day and drove downtown to the offices of Harper and Associates. Denise Harper had been handling my family's legal affairs for over a decade, ever since my father had needed help with some contractor licensing issues. She was a sharp woman in her early 40s, with the kind of no-nonsense demeanor that made clients feel confident their interests were being protected. "Nathan," she said, rising from her desk to shake my hand. "It's good to see you. Your father mentioned you might be stopping by. Thanks for making time on short notice." "Of course. He said you had some questions about property ownership and family trust matters." I settled into the chair across from her desk and pulled out a folder I'd prepared the night before. I need to understand my legal position regarding a car loan and some other financial arrangements with my brother. Denise listened carefully as I explained the situation with the car, the purchase, the payment arrangement, Lennon's default on both the loan payments and the insurance. I showed her the title, still in my name, and the documentation of Lennon's missed payments. "This is fairly straightforward," she said after reviewing the paperwork. "The vehicle is legally yours. You have every right to reclaim it, with or without your brother's consent. The fact that he's defaulted on the payment agreement only strengthens your position." "What about the money he owes me?" "You have documentation of the loan agreement and the missed payments. If you wanted to pursue legal action, you'd have a strong case. But given that this is a family matter, you might want to consider other approaches first." "What kind of approaches?" Denise leaned back in her chair, studying me. "Nathan, I've known your family for a long time. Your parents have always spoken highly of both you and Lennon, but they have also mentioned that you're the more responsible one, the one who cleans up messes." I nodded. "Sometimes, the best way to handle family disputes is to ensure that the responsible party has the leverage they need to protect everyone's interests, including their own." "I'm not sure I follow." "Your father called me last week about updating the family will and trust documents. He and your mother are concerned about making sure their estate is distributed fairly, but they're also worried about Lennon's financial responsibility." This was news to me. "What kind of concerns?" "The usual ones. Lennon's history of borrowing money and not paying it back, his tendency to make impulsive decisions, his lack of long-term planning. They love him, but they're not blind to his faults." "And they want to address that in their will?" "They're considering it, but they also don't want to seem like they're playing favorites or punishing Lennon for being young and careless." Denise paused. "However, if there were documented evidence of Lennon's financial irresponsibility, particularly evidence that showed a pattern of taking advantage of family members that might help them make a more informed decision." I understood what she was suggesting. "You're saying I should document everything." "I'm saying you should protect yourself and your family's interests. If Lennon is taking advantage of your generosity, your parents deserve to know that when they're making decisions about their legacy." I left Denise's office with a clear plan. Over the next few days, I methodically gathered evidence of Lennon's financial irresponsibility and deception. Bank records showing missed payments, text messages where he'd asked for loans, insurance notices showing his neglect of basic responsibilities. But the most damaging evidence came from an unexpected source. On Wednesday evening, I was walking past Kala's boutique, a trendy little shop in the downtown shopping district that I'd found through social media stalking. I wasn't planning to go inside, just curious to see the place where Lennon's new girlfriend worked. As I passed the front window, I could hear voices from inside. The shop was closed, but there were lights on in the back, and through the glass door, I could see two women having what looked like an animated conversation. One of them was clearly Calla. I recognized her from the photos Lennon had posted on social media. She was blonde, stylish, and exactly the type of woman Lennon usually dated. The other was presumably a friend or coworker. I couldn't help myself. I stepped closer to the door, pretending to look at the window display while straining to hear their conversation. "Told me his family has money," Calla was saying. "Like serious money. His parents owned property all over the state, and his dad was some kind of successful contractor." "And you believe him?" the other woman asked. "Why would he lie? You should see the car he drives, and he's always talking about family investments and trust funds and stuff." I almost laughed out loud. The car Lennon drove was mine, and while my parents were comfortable, they were hardly wealthy. Lennon was apparently painting a picture of family riches that bore no resemblance to reality. "Plus," Calla continued, "he's finally getting rid of that clingy ex-girlfriend, the one who was always texting him and expecting him to take care of her." "The sick one?" "Yeah. I mean, I feel bad for her and everything, but Lennon said she's been super needy since her surgery. Always wanting attention, always expecting him to drop everything for her. It's not his fault she got sick, you know?" The casual cruelty of it left me stunned. Kendra, who'd come dangerously close to losing her life, who'd been grateful for every step of her recovery, was being described as clingy and needy for expecting basic support from her boyfriend. "Anyway," Calla went on, "Lennon's planning to break up with her this weekend. Then we can finally go public with our relationship. I'm thinking we should plan a trip somewhere nice to celebrate. Maybe use some of that family money he's always talking about." I walked away feeling sick to my stomach, but also oddly energized. Calla's conversation had revealed something important. Lennon wasn't just deceiving Kendra and me, he was also lying to his new girlfriend about his financial situation. When Calla discovered that there was no family fortune, that the car belonged to me, and that Lennon was essentially broke, their relationship would implode. But that was Lennon's problem. My concern was protecting Kendra and making sure my parents understood who their younger son really was. That weekend, my parents hosted their usual family barbecue. It was a monthly tradition that had started when Lennon and I were teenagers, a way to ensure that the family stayed connected despite busy schedules and different priorities. I arrived early, as I always did, and helped my father set up the grill while my mother prepared side dishes in the kitchen. It was comfortable, familiar, the kind of domestic routine that made everything else seem manageable. Lennon arrived an hour late, which was also typical, but this time he wasn't alone. "Mom, Dad, Nathan," he said, walking into the backyard with Calla at his side. "I'd like you to meet Calla Turner. Calla, these are my parents, Walter and Judith, and my brother Nathan." The introductions were awkward, partly because my parents had been expecting Kendra, and partly because Lennon's tone was aggressively casual, as if bringing a new girlfriend to a family gathering without any advance notice was perfectly normal. "It's so nice to meet you," Calla said, turning on the charm. "Lennon talks about his family all the time." My mother, ever the gracious hostess, welcomed Calla warmly, but I could see the confusion in her eyes. My father was more direct. "What happened to Kendra?" he asked. "We were expecting to see her today." Lennon's jaw tightened slightly. "Kendra and I decided we were better as friends. It was mutual." The lie came so easily that I almost admired his skill, but I could see my parents exchanging glances, clearly surprised by this development. "That's too bad," my mother said diplomatically. "She seemed like such a lovely girl." "She is," Lennon agreed. "But sometimes relationships just run their course, you know? No hard feelings." I watched this performance with fascination and disgust. Lennon was rewriting history in real time, turning his betrayal into a mutual decision, his abandonment into a natural evolution. Calla, meanwhile, was working hard to make a good impression. She complimented my mother's cooking, asked interested questions about my father's retirement, and generally behaved like the perfect potential daughter-in-law. "Lennon tells me you work in IT," she said to me during a lull in the conversation. "That must be so interesting. It has its moments. And you're so close to Lennon. He's always talking about what a great brother you are, how you're always there for him." The irony was almost too much to bear. Family is important. Absolutely. Lennon was just telling me about some of the investments your family has made. Real estate, right? It sounds like you've all been very smart with your money. I glanced at Lennon, who was suddenly very interested in his burger, so he was still feeding Calla lies about the family's financial situation. "We're comfortable," I said carefully, "but I think Lennon might be overstating things a bit." He's probably just being modest," Calla said with a laugh. "He showed me some of the properties your parents own. Very impressive." I had no idea what properties she was talking about, but I could see my father looking confused. What properties? Walter asked. Lennon jumped in quickly. I just showed her some pictures from that lake house we rented last summer. She must have misunderstood. The conversation moved on, but I filed away another piece of evidence. Lennon wasn't just lying to Calla about money, he was actively deceiving her with fake photos and fabricated stories. After dinner, I found myself alone in the kitchen with my mother while she cleaned up. That was unexpected, she said quietly. Lennon bringing Calla? All of it. I had no idea he and Kendra had broken up. When did that happen? Recently, I think. It's just surprising. After everything that poor girl went through, everything you did for her. I thought they were planning a future together. So did I? My mother looked at me carefully. Nathan, is everything okay between you and Lennon? You seemed a little tense today. I'm fine, Mom. Because if something's bothering you, you know you can talk to me, right? Or to your father. I considered telling her everything right then, about Lennon's lies, about Kendra's heartbreak, about the car payments and the insurance and the casual way Lennon had dismissed my sacrifice. But something held me back. I know, I said instead. Thanks. Good, because family is the most important thing we have. Whatever problems you boys might have, they're not worth damaging your relationship permanently. I agreed with her, but I was beginning to think that Lennon was the one who'd already damaged our relationship. I was just finally starting to notice. That evening, I went home and organized all the evidence I'd gathered into a comprehensive file. Bank records, text messages, insurance notices, loan documents, and notes from my conversations with Denise Harper. I also wrote down everything I'd overheard at Calla's boutique and everything I'd observed at the family barbecue. Then I created a backup of everything on a USB drive, which I labeled simply Receipts. It felt like preparation for war, but I told myself I was just protecting my interests and my family's future. If Lennon wanted to continue taking advantage of everyone around him, he was going to discover that actions have consequences, and I was going to be the one to teach him that lesson. The call came on Thursday morning. My father's voice was unusually formal when he asked if I could meet him at Denise Harper's office the following afternoon. Is everything okay? I asked. Everything's fine, son. Your mother and I have just been thinking about some estate planning issues, and we'd like to discuss them with you. What about Lennon? There was a pause. We'll talk to Lennon separately. This meeting is just for you. I spent the rest of the day wondering what my parents had decided and why they wanted to talk to me alone. When I arrived at Denise's office Friday afternoon, I found my parents already there, sitting across from her desk with serious expressions. Nathan, my father said, standing to shake my hand. Thanks for coming. Of course. What's this about? Denise gestured for me to sit down. Your parents have been reconsidering some aspects of their estate planning, and they wanted to discuss the changes with you. What kind of changes? My mother leaned forward. Nathan, you know we love both you and Lennon equally, but we've been watching the way you've handled yourself over the years, the way you've always been responsible and dependable, and we think it's time our estate planning reflected that. I'm not sure I understand. My father cleared his throat. We're planning to revise our will to give you primary control over the family trust and assets. Lennon will still inherit his fair share, but it will be managed through the trust, with you as the executor. I stared at them. Why? Because you're the one we trust to make good decisions, my mother said simply. You're the one who's always been there when we needed you, who's never asked for anything in return. Lennon is still figuring himself out. We're not trying to punish him, my father added quickly, but we've seen how he handles money, how he makes impulsive decisions. This way, his inheritance will be protected, and you'll be able to help him make smart choices. Denise spread some documents across her desk. What your parents are proposing is actually quite common. The trust would ensure that Lennon receives regular income from his inheritance, but major decisions about investments or large expenditures would require your approval. And if something happens to us, my mother said, you'd be in a position to take care of Lennon the way you always have. I looked at the documents, feeling overwhelmed. This is a big responsibility. It is, my father agreed. But we can't think of anyone we'd trust more. What does Lennon think about this? My parents exchanged glances. We haven't told him yet, my mother admitted. We wanted to talk to you first, make sure you were comfortable with the arrangement. When are you planning to tell him? Soon, my father said. Maybe this weekend. We thought we'd have a family meeting, explain our reasoning. I thought about Lennon's recent behavior, his lies and deceptions, his casual dismissal of my sacrifice. My parents were making this decision based on years of observation, but they didn't know about the latest developments. "Oh, before you make any final decisions," I said carefully, "there are some things about Lennon that you should probably know." Denise raised an eyebrow. "What kind of things?" I pulled out the USB drive I'd been carrying in my pocket. "Everything's on here. Documentation of loans he's never repaid, evidence that he's been lying about his relationship status, proof that he's been financially irresponsible." My parents looked shocked as I explained about the car, the missed payments, the canceled insurance. I told them about Lennon's deception regarding Kendra, about his secret relationship with Calla, about the lies he'd been telling everyone. "I recorded some of this information at Denise's suggestion," I said, nodding toward the attorney, "to protect myself legally, but I think you should see it before you make any major decisions about the family trust." My father's face had grown increasingly grim as I spoke. "Nathan, are you saying Lennon has been lying to us about Kendra?" "I'm saying Lennon has been lying about a lot of things." My mother looked heartbroken. "But why? Why would he do that?" "I don't know, Mom. Maybe because he knew you wouldn't approve of how he's been handling things." Denise plugged the USB drive into her computer and began reviewing the files. After several minutes, she looked up with a professional expression that didn't quite hide her disapproval. "This is quite comprehensive," she said, "and it certainly supports your parents' instincts about Lennon's financial responsibility." "What do you think we should do?" my father asked. "I think you should proceed with the trust arrangement as planned," Denise replied, "but you might want to consider making the restrictions on Lennon's access a bit more stringent, given this new information." "We also need to address the car situation," I said. "Lennon is driving around uninsured, in a vehicle that legally belongs to me. If he gets into an accident, I could be held liable." "That's a valid concern," Denise agreed. "You have every right to reclaim the vehicle." My parents were quiet for a long moment, processing everything they'd learned. Finally, my father spoke. "Nathan, I'm sorry. We had no idea Lennon was taking advantage of you like this." "He's your brother, and you've always looked out for him," my mother added. "We should have been paying closer attention." "It's not your fault," I said. "Lennon's good at making people see what he wants them to see." "Well, not anymore," my father said grimly. "We'll be having that family meeting this weekend, but it's going to be a very different conversation than we originally planned." "What about the will changes?" "Oh, we're definitely proceeding with those," my mother said firmly. "If anything, this information has convinced us we're making the right decision." Denise began preparing the necessary paperwork. "I can have the revised will and trust documents ready by Sunday if you'd like to make this official quickly." "The sooner the better," my father said. I left the attorney's office feeling a mixture of satisfaction and apprehension. The wheels were now in motion for Lennon to face the consequences of his actions, but I knew he wasn't going to take it well. That evening, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to a towing company, arranging for them to pick up Lennon's car from his apartment complex on Sunday afternoon. The second was to Kendra. "Nathan," she said, sounding pleased to hear from me. "How are you?" "I'm okay. How are you doing?" "Better, actually. I've been doing a lot of thinking since our conversation the other day." "About Lennon?" "About everything. About what I want from my life. What I deserve from the people around me." She paused. "Nathan, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you think Lennon is seeing someone else?" The question hung in the air between us. I could lie, try to protect her feelings, or I could tell her the truth and let her make her own decisions. "Yes," I said quietly. "I think he is." There was a long silence. Then Kendra sighed. "I thought so. I've been trying to convince myself I was being paranoid, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. I'm sorry, Kendra." "Don't be. I'm actually relieved to know I wasn't imagining things." Another pause. "Nathan, would you like to have coffee sometime? Just the 2 of us? I feel like you're the only person in my life right now who's been completely honest with me." "I'd like that very much." "Good. Maybe tomorrow afternoon? There's a nice place downtown near the park." "I know the one. I'll see you there." After hanging up, I sat in my apartment, looking around at my quiet, orderly life. In 24 hours, everything was going to change. Lennon would discover that his deceptions had consequences, my parents would see him clearly for the first time, and I would finally stop being the family member who cleaned up messes without asking for anything in return. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, preparing to jump. Scary, but also exhilarating. I spent Saturday afternoon with Kendra at the coffee shop near the park. We talked for hours about her recovery, about her plans for the future, about the ways that surviving a life-threatening illness had changed her perspective on relationships and priorities. I used to think that being grateful for my life meant I should accept whatever scraps of affection people were willing to give me, she said, like I should be thankful for any attention at all, even if it wasn't very good attention. And now? Now I think that surviving something like this should make me more selective, not less. Life's too short to waste time on people who don't value you. We walked through the park afterward, enjoying the late afternoon sunshine. There was something peaceful about being with Kendra, something that felt natural and unforced. Nathan, she said as we sat on a bench overlooking the pond, can I tell you something? Always. These past few months, while Lennon has been pulling away, you've been the person who's made me feel like I matter, like I'm worth caring about. You are worth caring about. I know that now, but for a while, I forgot. She turned to look at me. I don't know what's going to happen with Lennon, but I want you to know that having you in my life has been one of the best things to come out of this whole terrible experience. I felt something shift in my chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. Having you in my life has been pretty wonderful too, I said. We sat there for a while, not talking, just enjoying each other's company. For the first time in months, I felt completely at peace. Tomorrow, I would confront Lennon with the truth about his deceptions. Tomorrow, my parents would learn who their younger son really was. Tomorrow, the family dynamic that had defined my entire adult life would change forever. But today, sitting in the park with a woman who understood the value of second chances, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Sunday dinner at my parents' house was a tradition that went back to my childhood. Usually, it was a relaxed affair. Good food, casual conversation, the comfortable rhythm of family life. But as I pulled into the driveway that afternoon, I knew this dinner would be different. My parents had called Lennon that morning, asking him to come over for a family discussion. They hadn't specified what kind of discussion, but they'd made it clear that his presence was required, not requested. I arrived first, as always, and found my parents in the kitchen making final preparations. The atmosphere was tense in a way I'd rarely experienced in this house. Are you sure about this? My mother asked for the third time since I'd walked in. We're sure, my father replied firmly. Lennon needs to understand that his actions have consequences. Denise Harper arrived shortly after me, carrying a briefcase full of legal documents. She'd agreed to be present for the will signing and also to serve as a neutral witness to whatever confrontation was about to unfold. How do you want to handle this? She asked my parents. Let Nathan present the evidence first, my father said. Then we'll discuss the will changes. At exactly 6 o'clock, Lennon's car, my car, pulled into the driveway. I watched through the window as he got out, looking relaxed and confident, completely unaware of what was waiting for him inside. He walked into the dining room with his usual casual charm, kissing my mother on the cheek and shaking my father's hand. Hey, everyone, he said, then noticed Denise. Oh, hi, Ms. Harper. I didn't know you'd be here. Lennon, she replied neutrally. So what's this family meeting about? Lennon asked, settling into his usual chair. Dad said it was important. My father looked at me and nodded. This was my moment. I stood up and placed a folder on the table in front of Lennon. It's about this. Lennon glanced at the folder but didn't open it. What is it? Documentation of every loan you've taken from me over the past 2 years, including the car loan you've defaulted on. Lennon's expression shifted slightly, becoming more guarded. Nathan, come on. We're family. We don't need to keep track of every little... $12,000, I interrupted. That's how much you owe me in unpaid loans, not including the car payments you've missed or the insurance premiums I've been covering. I told you I'd pay you back when things got better. When? When exactly were you planning to pay me back, Lennon? I don't know, man. Soon. Things have been complicated. Complicated how? Because you've been lying to everyone about your relationship status? The room went very quiet. Lennon looked around the table, suddenly realizing that this wasn't going to be the casual family meeting he'd expected. What are you talking about? I opened the folder and pulled out printed copies of text messages, bank statements, and insurance notices. I'm talking about the fact that you've been seeing Calla Turner for months while letting Kendra believe you were still committed to your relationship. Lennon's face flushed. That's not how it happened. Then how did it happen? Because I have documentation showing that you defaulted on the car payments around the same time you started dating Calla. I have text messages where you lie about your whereabouts. I have witness statements from people who've heard you talking about being finally free while Kendra was still recovering from surgery. Nathan, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. You used me to save Kendra's life, then abandoned her the moment she was no longer your problem. My mother gasped. Lennon, is this true? Mom, it's not that simple. It's exactly that simple, I said, pulling out more documents. Here's the car title, still in my name. Here are the insurance notices showing that the policy was canceled due to non-payment. Here's documentation showing that you've been driving uninsured for 3 months. Denise cleared her throat. Lennon, Nathan has every legal right to reclaim that vehicle. In fact, given the insurance situation, he'd be wise to do so immediately. Lennon looked around the table desperately. This is insane. Nathan, we're brothers. We don't need lawyers involved in our business. You made it a legal matter when you defaulted on your obligations, I replied calmly. What obligations? I never signed anything. You accepted a loan. You agreed to make payments. You took responsibility for insurance and maintenance. The fact that we didn't formalize it in writing doesn't change your moral and legal obligations. My father leaned forward. Lennon, did you or did not agree to pay Nathan back for the car? Well, yes, but... And have you been making those payments? Dad, things have been tight, and with Kendra's medical expenses... What medical expenses? I interrupted. Kendra's insurance covered the surgery, and you broke up with her months ago, so you're not responsible for her ongoing care anyway. Lennon's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. He'd been caught in so many lies that he couldn't keep track of which story he was supposed to be telling. Lennon, my mother said quietly, when did you and Kendra break up? It's complicated, Mom. It's not complicated, I said. They broke up in June. Lennon has been dating Calla since at least May, probably longer. That's not true. I pulled out my phone and opened a voice recording app. Would you like me to play the recording of you talking to Calla about how Kendra would figure it out soon enough? Lennon went pale. You recorded me? I overheard you. At your apartment, when I came to get my jacket. You were on the phone, talking about how you were going to break up with Kendra so you and Calla could stop sneaking around. The silence in the room was deafening. My parents stared at Lennon with expressions of shock and disappointment that I'd never seen before. Lennon, my father said slowly, are you telling me that you've been lying to us about your relationship status? That you've been cheating on Kendra while she was recovering from surgery? Dad, it's not cheating if what? If you decided the relationship was over without bothering to tell her? Lennon looked around the table desperately, searching for an ally, but finding none. Even his usual charm couldn't overcome the weight of evidence against him. This is ridiculous, he said finally. So what if I made some mistakes? So what if I owe Nathan some money? We're family. We work things out. We do work things out, my father agreed, which is why your mother and I have made some decisions about how to handle family finances going forward. Denise opened her briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. Lennon, your parents have decided to revise their will and estate planning. Okay, Lennon said cautiously. What does that have to do with anything? Under the new arrangement, my father explained, Nathan will serve as the executor of the family trust. Your inheritance will be managed through the trust, with Nathan having authority over major financial decisions. Lennon's face went through a series of expressions, confusion, disbelief, and finally anger. You're putting Nathan in charge of my inheritance. We're protecting your inheritance, my mother corrected, making sure it's managed responsibly. This is because of him, Lennon pointed at me accusingly. He's been filling your heads with lies about me. He's been telling us the truth about you, my father said firmly, something we should have been paying closer attention to all along. Denise spread the will documents across the table. Lennon, you'll still receive your full inheritance, but it will be distributed through a trust fund with built-in protections against financial mismanagement. I don't believe this, Lennon said, standing up abruptly. My own family is treating me like a criminal because I owe my brother some money. You're not a criminal, I said calmly, but you are financially irresponsible, and you've been taking advantage of my generosity for years. Taking advantage? Nathan, everything I've ever borrowed from you, I've paid back. Name one loan you've paid back in full. Lennon opened his mouth, then closed it again. He couldn't name one because there wasn't one. The car loan, he said finally. I've been making payments on the car. You made 3 payments, then stopped. That was 8 months ago. I was going to catch up. When? After you drove it to the lake with Calla? Lennon's eyes widened. How do you know about that? Because I heard you planning it. On the phone, with your girlfriend, while you were still supposed to be in a relationship with Kendra. My mother looked like she was about to cry. Lennon, how could you do that to that poor girl? After everything she went through, everything Nathan did for her? What Nathan did for her, Lennon repeated bitterly. Yeah, let's talk about that. Nathan, you think you're such a hero, don't you? swooping in to save the day, making everyone else look bad by comparison. I think I'm someone who keeps his commitments, I replied evenly. You're someone who keeps score. You've been keeping track of every favor, every loan, every little thing you've ever done for me, just waiting for the chance to use it against me. I started keeping track when you stopped paying me back. Lennon looked around the table one more time, seeing no sympathy in any of our faces. His charm had finally run out, and he was left with nothing but his anger and his sense of entitlement. Fine, he said. You want to treat me like a child? You want to put Nathan in charge of my money? Go ahead. But don't expect me to pretend like this is some kind of loving family decision. Lennon, my mother started, but he cut her off. No, Mom, I get it. Nathan's the good son, and I'm the screw-up. Message received. He started toward the door, then turned back. By the way, Nathan, I hope you and Kendra are very happy together. Because that's what this is really about, isn't it? You want my girlfriend. Ex-girlfriend, I corrected. And I want her to be treated with the respect she deserves. Right. Well, she's all yours now, along with everything else. Lennon stormed out, slamming the front door behind him. Through the window, I watched him get into the car, my car, and drive away. My father sighed heavily. I'm sorry you had to see that, Ms. Harper. I've seen worse, Denise replied diplomatically. Family disputes often bring out strong emotions. Will he be able to contest the will changes? My mother asked. Not successfully. The trust arrangement is perfectly legal, and given the evidence Nathan has provided, any court would likely view it as a reasonable protective measure. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from the towing company. Ready to pick up the vehicle, confirm location and time. I looked at my parents. There's one more thing we need to address. 20 minutes later, a tow truck pulled up to Lennon's apartment complex. I rode along, carrying the spare key and the title documents. Lennon's car was parked in his usual spot, and there was no sign of him anywhere. The tow truck driver was efficient and professional. Within 15 minutes, the car was loaded and ready to be transported to a secure lot until I decided what to do with it. As we were finishing up, Lennon appeared, apparently having returned from wherever he'd gone to cool off. His face went through a series of expressions as he saw his car being loaded onto the tow truck. What the hell is this? He shouted, running toward us. I'm reclaiming my property, I said calmly. You can't do this. That's my car. Actually, it's not. I showed him the title, still clearly in my name. It's my car, which I loaned to you under an agreement you've violated. Nathan, please. I need that car. I need it for work. You should have thought of that before you defaulted on your payments and let the insurance lapse. Lennon looked desperate now, all his earlier anger replaced by panic. I'll pay you back. I'll pay you everything I owe you. When? Soon, I promise. You've been promising that for months. I'm done waiting. The tow truck driver finished securing the car and handed me a receipt. All set, he said. Lennon watched helplessly as his transportation, my transportation, was driven away. Then he turned to me with an expression of pure hatred. I'll never forgive you for this, he said. I can live with that, I replied. I walked back to my own car, leaving Lennon standing alone in the parking lot. For the first time in years, I felt completely free of obligation to clean up his messes. When I got home, I found a text message from Kendra. I heard what happened at dinner tonight. Your mom called me. Are you okay? I smiled and typed back. I'm better than okay. Are you free for coffee tomorrow? I have some things I'd like to tell you. Her response came immediately. I'd love that. And Nathan, thank you for everything. I set my phone aside and looked around my quiet apartment. Tomorrow, I would start building a new relationship with Kendra, one based on honesty and mutual respect. Tomorrow, I would begin managing my family's trust, making sure their legacy was protected. Tomorrow, I would continue living my life without constantly worrying about Lennon's next crisis. But tonight, I was simply going to enjoy the peace that comes from finally standing up for yourself. My phone rang. It was Denise Harper. Nathan, I wanted to let you know that your parents have signed all the will documents. Everything is now legally binding. Thank you. There's one more thing. Lennon called my office about an hour ago. He wants to know if there's any way to contest the changes. And I told him that given the evidence of financial irresponsibility, any challenge would likely be unsuccessful and expensive. I also mentioned that if he continues to harass you about the car situation, you'd be within your rights to pursue legal action for the unpaid loans. What did he say to that? He hung up. I smiled. I appreciate everything you've done, Denise. Just doing my job. Your family is lucky to have someone like you looking out for their interests. After hanging up, I sat in my living room, thinking about how dramatically my life had changed in just a few hours. This morning, I'd been the family doormat, the reliable brother who cleaned up messes and asked for nothing in return. Tonight, I was the executor of the family trust, the man who'd finally drawn boundaries and enforced consequences. It felt good. Better than good. It felt right. My phone buzzed with one final message of the evening. It was from Lennon. "This isn't over." I read it, deleted it, and turned off my phone. As far as I was concerned, it was over. Lennon would have to learn to live with the consequences of his choices, just like everyone else,